Hello and welcome back to another Power Rankings video. We're heading into the Countdown Cup. The last tournament in the cycle, we have hero pools. I just did a meta report. If you want to go have a look at the meta report, you should go check that out because I really defined what I think the meta is going to be. It's not that complicated. Shanghai Dragons are going to play the Wrecking Ball comp for the most part, and I think that's going to be sort of the leading factor, and it's going to be everyone trying to catch up or find a solution or something else, right? Because at the moment, Shanghai looks to be a dominant team, and it doesn't seem to change in the Countdown Cup. But we're going to look at all the individual teams heading into this tournament, and let's always start at the bottom. Once again, if you're here and you join in halfway and you freak out, you're like, oh my god, why is Philadelphia Fusion in A tier? This is ridiculous. They're so... We're going from the bottom up. Okay, we're going to adjust it as we go from the bottom up. Okay, so Philadelphia Fusion will go down. Don't worry. We'll get there, but we're going to start from the bottom. Starting from the bottom, the LA Valiant is going to stay in E tier. It's not surprising to anybody. They haven't done anything that's given me any confidence in anything. They will stay here forever until they win or at least look good. They stay in E tier. GG. I'm not going to talk about them too much. There's not really much that can be taken out from this team. Even going into the end, it's not like, oh, there's a couple of good players. Milan Run looks pretty good. Yeah, there's some okay performances from some of the other players, but the team is just so bad that it's hard to really take anything away from their matches. So let's move it on. We're going to look at D tier. We have the Vancouver Titans. So Vancouver Titans is another team that is looking for a win. They haven't got a single win in this tournament. They've had some okay games, but they've been... For the most part, it's been pretty brutal. They've gone back and forth with their main tank now. So they had Shredlock. They now have Chungsik. Chungsik hasn't really impressed at all for the most part. He does look out of the loop, doesn't look that comfortable at certain times. But overall, Vancouver Titans just doesn't really match up with the rest of the league. The question is going to become, are they going to get a win? The Vancouver Titans have 4 games this tournament, and their last one of the season is going to be the London Spitfire. So the Breadstick Bowl is what we seem to be coining it, is going to probably be for will either of these teams get a win. So don't want to talk about Vancouver Titans too much either. There's not a whole lot going for them. I don't see them turning their season around. I just think they really struggle with talent in comparison to the rest of the league. They have some okay bits all around their roster, but if you put all these okay bits together, they're just a very okay team, and the league has improved so much over the last year or two that you can't get away with okay players, and it's just not really stepping up for them. So we'll see what happens from them. But we need to talk about their counterpart in the bottom of the West, which is the London Spitfire, because the London Spitfire have been a very disappointing team throughout the entirety of the year. They were hailed as the redemption of EU contenders. They are the hopes and dreams of EU contenders, but they haven't really shown that in this entire season. Sparker obviously came of age in the Summer Showdown, had some pretty good performances, looks good, looks to have revitalized the London Spitfire team, but they haven't been able to string it together. There's a couple of things they're good at, and something that a lot of people love to say right now is the London Spitfire could be a good team in this upcoming meta. We talked about Wrecking Ball dive seems to be where we're expecting to go. So they've shown that look a couple of times. Hardy on that Wrecking Ball, you get Sparker on the Tracer or Shax on the Tracer, and then you have all these different kinds of options. Shax can play the Sombra, we can put Sparker on the Tracer. Shadaisy kind of makes sense, right? I think they could definitely make that work, and it could play to their favor. With that said, I'm not going to move London Spitfire. I think that if neither of these teams, of the London Spitfire or the Vancouver Titans, get a win going into their final match, I would put my money on London at this point. Obviously, there's a lot of matches to be played between here and then, but London looked like the better team. I agree that some people are saying that there's a chance that, maybe London will look better and they can get some wins. They don't have that hard of a schedule, if I remember correctly, heading into this tournament. They are potential to get some wins. I think, was it Patrick who came in and said that London could potentially go 3-1 in this tournament? There is potential, right? I think this is definitely more up their alley. But are they going to be able to string it together? Will Molfig play the ball? A lot of you guys like to talk. I just saw that one in chat. People like to say that Molfig does have a good ball, and they've actually played that a couple of times. But I think if you're going to play the Wrecking Ball, you need the Diva or Isaiah. So I expect Molfig to stay in his lane and have Huddy pick up that Wrecking Ball. Unless they're feeling spicy. They could easily feel spicy, so we'll see. Remember that London almost beat Shock. Yeah, but I think a lot of people are heavily reading into that almost win. And that's sort of why I'm saying that I think they have a lot of redeeming qualities. But I don't, Shock don't look great from time to time. That looked like one of those matches for the San Francisco Shock. I do believe in London, but as I said, I can't move them out of D tier until they start getting match wins. But I definitely think there's more hope in London than there is the Vancouver Titans right now. So that is why they're staying in D tier, but I can't justifiably move them up to C. I am excited for them. I hope they do get wins. I hope they start proving themselves because they need to, right? There's going to be massive changes. If they go 0-16, or they even go 1-15 and they only beat Vancouver, but they don't get any good wins, they don't show this drastic improvement, the question becomes, they only have 4 matches left in the season. Are they going to keep this roster together? Is the London Spitfire going to stay with them? Are they going to commit to them? Or are they going to have to start making changes? Which means that a couple of these players this might be some of their last matches in the Overwatch League, at least for the London Spitfire. So we're at the point where every match matters for their careers, especially at the bottom end. Players are playing to play next year, to make statements for themselves, or at least just prove that they aren't as bad as everyone sort of thinks they are right now, because London Spitfire, as I said, British Hurricanes, hailed from the European region to be very, very good, haven't put that performance out this year, so I hope they can show some of those games. I hope they go 2-2. I hope they get some upsets, because I think they deserve it. So, moving on though, let's talk about the Paris Eternal. So Paris Eternal had a phenomenal summer showdown, really putting on a great performance. Not on just they played so many different things as well. They didn't just sort of play their one thing. I think they really heavily lined on the Reinhardt Brawl. They played that, but they also were willing to play the Wrecking Ball from time to time with the Farah. They made that switch a couple of times. One of the few teams in the West that was willing to go. So Paris Stonks are on the way up. Everyone said that London was going to be better than Paris. We know that is not the case anymore. But even further to that point, I actually think this could be a very good tournament for Paris Eternal. For what I just said, I think this is a good meta for them. They are better when they play more of the dive style, in my opinion. I think they can actually match up quite well. Where they seem to have struggled from time to time was just not being able to perform on a team level with some of these high hit scans, with some of these ridiculous Mei players and all that kind of stuff. I think if you take that element out and they play this Wrecking Ball, I think they can have a great run through it. So let's have a look at the Paris Eternals played matches that they had, the tournament they had last time. So in the Summer Showdown, they beat London, they beat Gladiators, they lost to the San Francisco Shock, and they lost to the Washington Justice in the qualifiers for Hawaii in the Western region in the Summer Showdown. 3-2 to Washington Justice, and Washington looked very good. So there is a lot of things to be excited about for the Paris Eternal, I think, as you move forward into this tournament. I think they've done a great job. What's their record this season? So far, their record right now is they are sitting pretty comfortably 8th with a 6-6 even record. So they're pretty good. This isn't a team that I think are playing for their careers or anything. They're playing to play in the playoffs. They're playing to keep moving forward, and they're improving at such a rapid rate that I think they could easily make out like a bandit and beat some of these teams. Is Paris better than Toronto, Boston, Florida Mayhem right now? Probably. I would probably put my money on Paris over those teams. So exciting things for Paris Eternal. With that said, I don't think I can justifiably move them up to the B tier. Can I? Wait, can I move them to B? What do you think? Chat, do you think B tier? We should put Paris Eternal in the B tier. Because I think they probably should. Yeah, we need to move everything around. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to move them. I might move them back down, but I'm pretty sure with my statement of I think they're better than Boston or Toronto. Well, I guess that becomes a question. Do you think Paris is better than Boston or Toronto? Probably, right? Yeah. They beat Gladiators. They had a great tournament. Yeah. You're right. Let's move them to B tier. I think. Yeah, I think they should be in B tier. I'm going to use the contributing factor as well that we're going into the Countdown Cup, and I think it's going to be a good meta for them. I don't think you can move them to A tier. They haven't beaten these top teams consistently enough. Like, obviously, they had that good win against the Gladiators, 3-2. But they did lose to Shock. They did lose to Washington. I don't think they're as good as, like, the top 6 in the West. But I think I can put them above everyone else. So I think that's fair. You guys are right. Paris are A. Paris are not in A tier. Paris are just not in A tier. There's no way they're in A tier. I think they are pretty comfortably in B. I think you guys are right. You've swayed me. I was being a little silly. But I agree with you guys. I think they should be in the B tier. But there's no way they're in A tier. They're just not. There's going to be like 6 teams up here, and if you think that they're top 8 in the league, I think that's kind of crazy. Gatekeeper team. Everyone likes to throw that terminology around. Not really. Paris is a team that's trying to break through the gatekeeper. Like, they are at that cusp of, like, on the outside trying to break into that top 6, but I don't think they're there, and I don't think they've just... Gatekeeper team is essentially a team that's always been in the middle, right? I would say, like, Boston and Toronto are more the gatekeeper teams, where they never really have had those big performances where they've beaten top 6 teams. Obviously, they have, like, here and there, but for the most part, they've stayed right here, while Paris started quite poor. Remember, like, Paris at the start of the season really struggled. Melee, they lost to they lost a bunch of teams. They lost to Toronto, but they're, as of late, they've started having their redemption arc. So I think we'll put them there. So let's talk about the Toronto Defiant. And something that I think needs to be talked about when we're talking about Toronto Defiant is I haven't heard about Aspire at all. Have they said anything at this point? Have I missed some news? But as far as I'm aware, Aspire isn't signed to this team on a short form contract. So if he's not going to be put in that short form contract, then I actually don't like Toronto Defiant as much, which sounds crazy because we're like, it's Hangzhou Nice. They were great. They were fine. They have Logics as well. But I don't know. Like, Aspire really was doing some heavy lifting for this Toronto Defiant team. And even then, they weren't able to get a lot of those wins. So he's on the team full-time. No, they have not announced that Aspire is on this team full-time. They have not said anything about that. He was signed for a short-form contract for the June Joust. He was signed for a short-form contract for the Summer Showdown, but we haven't heard anything about it. So we don't know what his next step is, and we haven't heard that. So they say he's still on the Liquipedia. I don't trust Liquipedia, have fully updated. They do a pretty good job, but not perfectly. And, you know, I think a lot of people like to hype Toronto up of like, oh yeah, they were like, they're getting better, they're improving, but, you know, they beat Florida 3-2, but Florida, we can all agree, is just not doing so hot right now. Vancouver Titans don't think, but they've lost to every team they should be below, right? Boston, Shock, Houston, Gladiators, Dallas. Nothing about their games have made me be like, oh, these guys are incredible. They stay pretty firmly down here in C tier. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Aspire moving into this Countdown Cup, because if he's not going to be here, Nice and Hangzhou going to be able to step up again. They impressed me in the Melee, but, you know, Aspire has really been, honestly, he's like a catalyst for a lot of their success in team fights. He's been getting such good pulse bombs on the Tracer, and I really liked Aspire's Tracer. It was so good. So we'll see. Above Charge, don't look at this in terms of like the order that they're in. That's not real. I don't really do that in anything. Like, and I'm not gonna rate the Guangzhou Charge compared to the Toronto Defiant. These two teams play completely different teams. It's impossible to compare the bottom end of the East versus the West, because they, like, the Eastern teams are just getting beaten down by the Shanghai Dragons and like these other teams, but it's also so much in flux, while the West is like, if you're not in the top 6, then you're not really seeing much. So let's talk about the Guangzhou Charge though. Actually, no, let's do Boston first. Let's stick on to the West when we're going down here. So let's talk about Boston. It's another team that I think has been pretty firmly. They haven't had any crazy wins except for, in my opinion, this one Houston win, right? This Genji strategy that worked so well, and it was like, is Boston really good now? And we were like, yo, Boston's so sick. This is going to be great, playing Genji, playing their own style. And then they played against Atlanta and Gladiators and got bopped. They got pretty bopped. It wasn't that good. So, and then they beat Florida and Vancouver, teams that we talked about where both of them are struggling. So they did get 3 wins in the Summer Showdown. Yes. But the only good win that they had, and good match really, was against the Houston Outlaws. And if you go back and watch that match, Houston just looked so unprepared for what Boston threw at them. And Boston really caught them off guard. They played incredibly well, but they weren't ever able to replicate that in the rest of the Summer Showdown. So, you know, big props to the Boston Uprising for getting that. But once again, a team that hasn't really given me enough data to put them above the C tier. I think Toronto and Boston do have this interesting ability to just like come out and play very well, but they just don't string it together in any way. Valentine's been really good for Boston. That's a great thing. I think Faith's been playing up. They've been doing good. But I don't know. Just they haven't been able to get enough good wins for my liking. I think their biggest weakness has been their ability to adapt. So I think they stay in C tier. A lot of you guys saying C tier as well. I think that's fair right now. Because remember, we are very heavy loaded with teams right now in terms of like who's going to be on the top end. Like, remember, I think if Boston and Toronto were in the East, it'd be really interesting to see where they would stand in the grand scheme of things, right? Because the West is very top heavy. And I think Boston and Toronto are like just on the outskirts of that. But the top 6 teams in the West are very, very good. While in the East, it's like Shanghai Dragons and then like Seoul Spark, Philly. Shanghai Dragons, Chengdu, and then it's like Philly, Seoul, Spark. Like, how would Boston and Toronto do against Philly, Seoul, Spark? Because those teams seem very inconsistent, and would they be able to get wins against those? We haven't seen that matchup happen at all, and I think that'd be a really interesting thing. So maybe we'll see that in the playoffs. So, you know, but that's just like all hypotheticals at this point. All right, so we gotta now address the elephant in the room, okay? The Guangzhou Charge. Is it time to move them down just out of sheer like upsetness at them? Like, they have 3 wins this season, right? 2 of them are against New York Excelsior and 1 of them is against Valiant. Choi stocks up. Choi is very good, right? Choi's the one is so good, and they should be better than this. They have Krong. I still rate Kariv. I think Rio's kind of solid, but something is wrong. And I think we can all agree that their coaching shenanigans, whatever's been happening with their coaching, it's hard to keep track of, but like the Charge and I think it's the Spark are just all over the place with coaches. They just don't have those consistency in coaches, so that's why it's hard to really like have an idea, because they did have a couple of good wins against New York Excelsior, but NY Excelsior also have their own issues. So many 0-3s. Yeah, like it's not the fact that like I'm not looking at their wins. Like obviously if you just look at their wins, they are around everyone else, but they have some really bad games. Like if you go back and watch a lot of these 3-0s, it's like they're not even competitive. It's like Charge just look like they're just lost in the game. But then they like go on to almost beat Seoul, and it's like, well, are they getting better? And this is why the East is so hard. Is like, was Seoul getting play bad? Did Charge get better? Did something happen? Did they fire their coaches and then no one knew what to do? Like, it's so hard in the East. I think the redeeming qualities that Charge have going into this tournament is that they have Choicer One, who can play the Tracer. You can play Eileen on the Sombra, who's pretty solid at it. Kriv will probably play the Zen. I think this can be a good tournament for them. You can get Rio. Rio's very comfortable. Am I thinking of Jihan? They have Jihan on the bench, right, who plays the Wrecking Ball like quite well. He's like their Wrecking Ball specialist, right? So if Jihan comes in to play the ball and they lean into it, it can be a good tournament for them. So I think I'm going to lead them in C tier just for that, right? I don't have any faith in the Charge or the coaching, but all their coaches have to do is like use their eyeballs, look at what Shanghai Dragons do and say, we have the tools for that. Let's just do that. Okay? If they do that, they should be fine. They should have a pretty solid tournament. I don't think they'll look as lost. But do I trust them to do that? Probably not. But it's such an easy ask that I'm just going to keep them in the C tier. I think they should say it because... yeah, I think I'm just going to keep them here. Custa move Titans down and put Charge with London. I actually like that call. I actually like that. I think we move everything down. Let's move Vancouver down, and then we'll move Charge with London, because that puts them in the same area of, like, I think London's in the exact same boat of, if they just play the meta of what the Shanghai, I think they could be good, and they can get wins, and they can be competitive. And I do think London is better than Vancouver. So I actually like this adaptation. I like this change. I think that's like the best of all worlds, where it doesn't feel like I'm just like putting too much faith in the coaching staff that I'm not even sure exists for the Charge. And I don't believe in Vancouver to get a win this tournament. So if they're going to go 0-16 with the Valiant, or I think we need to go one step further. Happy? I think we just need to make it longer. I think that's maybe better. Because Valiant is just F tier. Like they're straight through. They're just not good. It feels disrespectful putting Vancouver with Valiant. And I think that's the issue that I was having with them both in the E tier. And people wanted to put them in F tier, so there it is. There it is. All right. So then we're going to talk about the New York Excelsior. So NYXL is just... Is NYXL good? 1 week. Yeah, they look like they're stringing it together. The next week, ooh, this isn't great. Whoa! I am glad I'm not an NYXL fan. That is what I will say. Because I don't ever know... Like, they made the June Joust tournament and got absolutely blown out. But I think the inconsistency of the East is like most apparent when you try and break down what has happened with the NYXL throughout this entire like tournament. Charge play Dragons, Chengdu, Spark, and Valiant this tourney. Interesting. They'll lose to Dragons and Chengdu. There's a chance they could beat Spark and they'll beat Valiant. I think that's probably where they go. NYXL lost to Charge every time. And that's it, right? Like, they keep losing to Charge. But then they, like, beat the Spark. This was the tournament to qualify, but Spark looked really bad. So that's how they qualified. And then they beat Philly, but it's like, I don't know what is happening with Philly right now either. Like, I think that's a good way to put it, Tanky. I feel like NYXL is a team that plays up to their opponents. Obviously to a certain level, but also potentially has a chance to play down with some of them. I think they stay pretty consistently in C. And I do want to talk about NYXL just as a season overall, because I don't think we'll see a ton of them. I don't think they're going to have a redemption arc. This is a building year for the NYXL. And you need to keep that in mind when you talk about them, right? I think they got some great pieces. I think Flora's really good. I think Jonek is still solid. I think he's had a couple of good performances. I like their tank line more. With Yakpung and I'm forgetting his name. With Yakpung and Kalios. Sorry. With Yakpung and Kalios in the front line, I think they look way better. Maybe it's just previous synergy and that's just working. But whatever was happening with Yakpung and Bianca, it wasn't great. I like the adjustment. They look a bit better. So that's a good development, right? And you're like, oh, maybe we can go into the future with that. I think Guangbung's been very good when he's got more comfortable. Just hasn't been a hit scan tournament, right? Like, yeah. So I think Guangbung's just sort of been on the bench and hasn't really been given the keys to success. But I think that, like, you can work around that. Like, Feather's been okay. Bianca's struggled. Friday, I'm not sold on. But you can work with that, right, heading into next season. So you need to be optimistic about the future. They have so many rookies this season. That I think you had to be crazy to think that they were ever going to be very, very good. So, something of note as well is Ivy actually retired from Overwatch, right? Like, just all of Overwatch, he retired. So, maybe explains why we haven't seen as much Ivy, because he was, in my opinion, one of the more consistent, stronger players coming into it. So, you know, rough to see, but it is what it is. So I think NYXL stays pretty comfortably in C tier. I don't trust them to put them in B tier. I think that's also like hard, especially when you start considering the West. So NYXL is going to stay pretty comfortably in the C tier. Here we are. And I think you look towards next season if you're a NYXL. I'll thank you guys all for the subs after this as well. All right. We got Paris here. Washington Justice. And I think my heart tells me I should put Washington Justice in the A tier. Because my brain says no because they've just been so bad throughout the year, especially with some of their coaching decisions of not playing Decay, not like forcing Jerry into the lineup. Their backline has struggled from time to time, but they look good now. And they were very close to making it to Hawaii. I think they go up into the A tier for now. But it gets really hard if we put them in the A tier for a lot of reasons. But I think we're going to stack the A tier from here. So here's what we're going to do. They're at the same level as Glads. Yes. So we're going to have to, we'll get to that. So what this positioning will make more sense as we get there, as we move down the line. But I'm putting them in the A tier. And I think they look way better. This is going to be a good tournament. My only question is, how good is Mag's Bowl? Because we saw them play it a little bit, right? Like, they played a little bit of ball. They were one of the few teams that actually played it in the tournament. I think if you can have Decay play that Tracer, really get into that carry role, Fury on the Diva, the backline sort of like can play their Briggs in, I think they can be an A tier. They can have a good tournament. But just their previous tournament results from the Summer Showdown was just really quite good. Where is Washington? They beat Florida, London, Gladiators, and Paris. So the Gladiators and Paris were both best fives, but I think both of these teams were playing well in the Summer Showdown. And the fact that they're able to overcome that and almost beat Dallas as well, I think you have to be hyped for them. It seems like a lot of the Washington Justice woes are over, and their roster is finally coming to fruition because they have such a good roster. Where did I have them at the start of the year? Like second or something like that? So they're finally getting to that level. They're not at that point where like they're unlocked potential and they can maybe make a late run through the playoffs, but I think they can easily they can make waves. So they play Outlaws, Glads, Defiant, and Vancouver. That's interesting, right? So Outlaws, Glads, those are going to be two hard matches for Washington, but I think they can win both of those. I think it's impossible to say that Washington can't beat those anymore, right? And then Defiant and Vancouver should be quite easy wins for them. So I'm excited to see more of this Washington roster because if they can keep the momentum going from the Summer Showdown and keep like, get back in the kitchen and keep throwing shit together and just keep playing to their strengths, it'll be good. Just don't, I think they were oversimplifying it, right? Where it's like, we're playing Hitscan, we should play Jerry. It's like, no, just keep Decay in. If they sub out Decay, I'm just going to instantly move them back down to the B tier. So that's always there with the Washington Justice. You'll understand the A positioning more as we go on. So let's talk about the Chengdu Hunters. Chengdu Hunters is a team that has to go into the A tier, right? Straight up, they had a great Summer Showdown. They look good in this meta. They probably don't have to switch anything up. They got the Jinmu on the Pharah. They got the Among Wrecking Ball, even Gaga when they want to play that. Fucking everything looks really good. Nisha and Yveltal both look like they're playing incredibly well. You can't ask for more from these guys. You can't ask for more. So let's have a look at let's have a look at their results because I think that speaks louder than anything I can say about this team. Also, like, I'm talked about a couple of players, but you could just say all of them. Leave is like actually an MVP candidate. Straight up a MVP candidate. He's so good in this meta. I think they've decided like, hey, let's not play Jimmy, which you know how I feel about Jimmy, but that's not even a slight against Jimmy. It's like, don't force Jimmy in a non-hit scan meta. And I think with Ash being out of the pool, Jimmy will hopefully just stay on the bench. Leave Jinmu can just do what they want to do. Jinmu and Leave can both just sort of flex around wherever they need to. And like, Monk's just incredible as well on that Zenyatta. So went toe-to-toe with the best in the business that I think we have in Izayaki. So I think this is a great tournament for them. Chengdu will be dominant again in the Countdown Cup. There's no doubt about it in my mind. They have the same meta, and they were better than all of the West, right? The West, I think the West has to catch up to Chengdu before they can catch up to Shanghai, right? That's sort of like the stepping stone. But Chengdu has that weird thing of they can play the Pharah, and I think they play the Pharah better than the Shanghai Dragons. Chengdu's biggest weakness is I don't think they have good adaptability. If they can play whatever they want to play and no one can stop them from doing it, they just will crush you. But Shanghai Dragons has an innate ability to force Chengdu out of their comfort. Whether or not they'll be able to do that as much in this meta, we'll see. But Chengdu, very good. S tier. No. Chengdu will Chengdu themselves. The moment you start putting too much faith in the Chengdu, they're gonna Chengdu themselves and they're gonna fuck something up. Like, who knows? Like, maybe in this meta, but until, like, obviously they had a great tournament. Like, let's have a look at this. Let's have a look at their results. They had a great tournament, Summer Showdown. Just absolutely did well against the East. But even then, like, they went to 5 with Seoul. They went to 5 with Philly. Then the June Joust, they really struggled. So, like, the consistency is always the thing, right? Like, you just look at their career of, like, they have a lot of red, then they go green, and then they go red, and then they go green, and then they go red, and then they go green. Like, that's the problem, and that's why I can't, like, nothing in my mind says I should ever put Chengdu in the S tier. Because any given tournament, they can struggle. So, that is actually a great point, 10K, that I wasn't even thinking about. There is an issue potentially that Jinmu will not be available for the beginning matches because of some COVID quarantine stuff that is happening. If Jinmu is not available, that is a big problem in my opinion, because, you know, Lee's great and all, but I think Jinmu's ability to play the Sombra and the Pharah, and Lee just plays around that, is such an important thing. But I don't know how that's going to work. Yeah, there is the meme that Yveltal said he's the best Pharah in the game, and Jinmu's second. I would fucking love it. I want the Pharah Mercy combo of Yveltal Nisha to just dominate the competition. I want Yveltal to step up and put the money where his mouth is. No, I'm not saying Jimmy. I want Yveltal Pharah before I want Jimmy. So, we'll see. We'll see. We don't know what's happening with that. Obviously, that's getting updated as time goes on. But if Jinmu's not in, obviously that throws a bit of a wrench in it. But it's hard to consider those things. And I'm not really considering that too much when we're talking about these teams. So, moving on, the Florida Mayhem, who are in free fall right now. And the question becomes of how low do we put them? C, D, C, D, F, D. They haven't said anything about OGE coming back to play, have they? We have no idea who's playing main tank, do we? I've seen in ranked, I've played with Checkmate on DPS. It does not seem like Checkmate is practicing tank. OG is back in NA? Okay. I'm going to put him in C then. Please just play OGE. There is not a single instance where someone switching role in the middle of a season has ever worked very effectively. And I think we can all agree it was a fun experiment, and it's time to put it to rest. The Chadmate was fun. He's in NA since 2 weeks ago. Awesome. Okay. So they're going to stay in C tier. Even with OG, if he's not playing well, he's boomed, all those kind of things. They have Yaki, they have BQB, they have Gangnam Jin. They should be better. I'm not going to put him in B tier because, like, let's just look at their record of where it is. Where's the Florida Mayhem? Hello? Am I blind? There it is. This is why. They are 0-7. I've been there. It sucks. It doesn't look good. And it's not even like they played like super, super hard teams. Like, they didn't have an easy schedule, but they lost to Toronto, they lost to Boston. Yeah, they're just not looking good. So they stay in C tier. If they need to work out their main tank solution, keep Checkmate in, keep playing your style. But I think this could be a good tournament. Put BQB on the Sombra, Yaki on the Tracer, OG's Wrecking Ball, I'm not 100% sold on, but hey, I'm sure they can make it work. This can be good for the Florida Mayhem, but they stay in C tier just because of how poor their performance has been late. They got a hard schedule. Who are they playing? Does anyone have their schedule? For what I'm looking at? What? I don't know. Houston, Glads, Atlanta. Okay. Wow. They have potential to go 0-10. Those are three hard teams. Houston, Glads, Atlanta, I'm pretty bullish on. Yaki on Tracer though, yeah. But it's like there's no slouches in any of those teams when you look at their counterparts, right? Like he has to go against Kevster, needs to go against fucking who's the Tracer player for? Just Pelican doesn't play the Tracer, it's Edison, right? Edison. Wait, who's the Tracer player for Atlanta? When was the last time? I actually want to look this up because like my brain says that it makes sense, but I don't. It is Edison, right? Oh no, that's gonna take forever because I pressed Alt. Edison plays at 14.5% of the time, and Pelican plays at 6.3%. So they have very heavily leaned away from Tracer if you're the Atlanta Reign. Like that's not much at all. That's like less than an hour. So that's interesting how little Tracer they've played. Since Edison is also the Sombra, yeah. So it would probably be Pelican because Edison's the Sombra. And I don't think Kai comes into play at all with hit scan not being meta. So that'll be interesting. Sorry, we just sort of randomly hit a tangent for them, but yeah. Pelican is the Sombra player? Oh, okay. Is he? Interesting that neither one of them have hit the 5% threshold for Sombra. They have only played 16% Sombra. Let's go down to the usage of... Oh, what? No, usage of 0. Edison... No, Pelican is the Sombra player. You're right. Edison has barely played any Sombra. Interesting. And Iris only plays BAP. Yeah, Iris is leaned heavily into the BAP. So that is an interesting thing to look at for Atlanta going into this dive meta. So, all right, let's move on though. I think Mayhem stays down there at C tier. So the Gladiators. I'm moving the Gladiators up. So the Gladiators, and I think this is sort of where we are now, I think the Outlaws, the San Francisco Shock, the Atlanta Reign, the Washington Justice, and the Gladiators are all in A tier. I think it's impossible to distinguish these five because they've all been good, right? But none of them has distinguished themselves as above or below the others. So it's very hard to like justifiably put anyone below into the B tier, right? Shock B tier, to be honest, I disagree with that. I think people are overthinking. I agree that Shock is probably the most likely to drop out of this, but we'll get to the San Francisco Shock later. But let's talk about the Gladiators, right? The Gladiators have been a team that has looked much better since Kevster came into North America, right? He's popping off on that Tracer. Team seems to be playing with better synergy, but they had some rough matches. So they lost to Paris 3-2. This was the big one, and this was like the one that's like the nail in the coffin of like how good is the Gladiators. But I don't know. They look good. They lost to Atlanta in 5. They lost to Washington in 5. They lost to Paris in 5. And that sort of reinforces my point of like they are very good, but I haven't seen them. Gladiators have never stepped above where they are, right? And that's what the biggest meme of like the Gladiators and the Sadiators has always been. They've always had a pretty solid roster, but they've never overperformed or underperformed to this roster. And this year is no different. They haven't gone to Hawaii. They haven't played against the best and they like or gotten these massive wins when it matters. They just seem to always falter when it has an issue. So we'll see where where Gladiators end up. This is just another one of like, is Gladiators going to be good? It kind of feels like a coin flip at this time. They could end up in Hawaii. I think you could easily say the Gladiators might end up in Hawaii, but there's 4 other teams that they have to get through and they need to prove it. What is the Gladiators' schedule going into this tournament? Does anyone have it? Is there an easy way to see what the schedules are? Because other than just like going through the schedule, like the actual like Overwatch League website schedule, I find it really hard to find. Use over.gg. Does that show like all the teams? I use over.gg. Let's look at... Oh, that is great. Oh, that is awesome, actually. Okay, so they play Houston, Florida, Washington, Atlanta. So Gladiators also has a very difficult schedule coming up. So this is over.gg, and GG, if you're curious, this is a good website that just has like everything Overwatch. It's not as updated as frequently as it used to be, but it's still quite good. So yeah, that is a hard schedule for the Gladiators. Atlanta Reign, Florida, Washington, and Houston. As I said, I have them all in the A tier, and I think it's weird that we're very A tier heavy, but I think that's just how it's going to be. For this tournament, because I don't know which one is going to be the best. And we'll go across the list and we'll explain that why. So let's start. All right, actually, before everyone just starts freaking out, let's move Philly down, because I know a lot of you are complaining about Philly. Philly is in the B tier. Don't worry. They're not staying in the A tier. And we'll talk about the Spark as well. So Philadelphia Fusion, still on paper, have a great roster. They've been hard screwed by everything to do with their roster, with visas and all that kind of stuff. So you have to feel bad for them. But even then, their performances are lackluster. And there's a really interesting thing that I want to show you that I think kind of embodies a lot of like the issues that I think that they have. Where is it? Philadelphia Fusion. Look at what they played in the Summer Showdown. Look at how many heroes they played and what they played and all over the place. Let me move the usage back to 5% real quick, just so like it doesn't fill it with garbage. But even then, like, this is a lot of heroes. Like, Mano played almost equally 4 different main tanks. No one really else has this kind of distribution. Like, when you compare it to a team like, let's use the Dallas Fuel as an example, right? Like, look at how much it skews. Like, there's so much smaller. Like, they just don't play anywhere near as many heroes. Philadelphia Fusion is spreading themselves so thin with a lot of their, like, they're just trying to play everyone. Carpe, EQO, Rascal, they all played Tracer. They, like, a bunch of them played McCree. It's just very much all over the place. So hopefully with this meta, they'll be able to just sort of, like, hone in and focus on one thing, because they don't have any lack of talent. Right? They have very good. They now have Shockwave, who's eligible to play. They have a Funny Astro back in the mix. Obviously, Lucio's banned, which kind of sucks for Funny Astro. It'd be interesting to see if we see him, but, you know, I think Philly needs to really start putting together some good performances just for themselves going into next season, because they've obviously had a rough season, but, like, they lost to Chengdu, they lost to NYXL. Like, they haven't really beaten a lot of teams, and they've just been the inconsistent Philly that we used to know them for, but they actually weren't like that last year. They were very consistent last year. They had the best regular season record, but that just hasn't been what has come from it. I don't know exactly what the issue is for this team. They're playing against Dragon, Spark, NYXL, and Seoul. Yeah, so I think they can potentially beat Spark, NYXL, and Seoul. They could go 3-1. They also could go 0-4. Right? That's the issue with the Philadelphia Fusion. I'm going to keep them in B tier just because I'm a Philly simp of just, I think they have incredible players. They get Alarm on that Zen. They get whoever to play that Brig. I think you can get some carry players on the DPS. I think this can be a good tournament for them, for sure. And it could be a good meta, but something has been going tragically wrong. And I think it could just be all the pressures of everything else going on around it. Right? And then we got the Hangzhou Spark, which is a team that is interesting as well. They're going to stay in the B tier. I'm keeping Seoul, Philly, and Spark in the B tier because I don't think either of these teams are better than any of these teams, right? They have the potential. All 3 of these teams have the potential to beat any of these teams on any given day. if all the players on Philly pop off, if Profit and Fitz pop off for Seoul, if Shy pops off for Spark, they all have potential. The issue is, I don't know what they're doing from game to game. It doesn't make any sense. Do you think Philly beats NYXL? I think Philly can beat NYXL is what I was saying. So let's have a look at the Spark. So the Spark lost to Seoul, lost to Shanghai, went 2-2. They beat NYXL 3-2. My issue with the Spark is that I feel like if Shy doesn't pop off, they just lose. They just straight up lose. But I also think Shy is best when he's on either the hit scan or the echo. And Echo's banned, and I don't think hit scan's going to be played. So I'm not sold that this is going to be a good tournament for the Spark. I think they can definitely beat a couple of teams. They could easily go, like, get a couple of matches. Like, what is their upcoming matches? Like, they could easily... Their upcoming matches are Charge, Hunters, Fusion, and Seoul. Like, they could easily go, like, 2-2. Maybe 3-1. But that's because Seoul and Philly are inconsistent, right? But I don't see Spark making it to Hawaii again. So, without Shy being on this carry potential, that is really where we saw the most success from the Spark. So without that, I'm not 100% sold that the Spark are going to be good. They're going to stay in B tier because I think they are better than all these C tier teams, at least consistently. But I don't think they're going to break anyone. They're not going to raise everyone's eyebrows like they have before, just because I don't think Shy is going to be able to carry as much as he usually does. So, and then talking about Seoul. We should pretty much just rename the Seoul Dynasty to Profit and Fitz show. Like, it's literally Seoul Dynasty live and die by Profit and Fitz. Are they popping off? Yes. Good job. Okay, you win the game. Are they not? Are they getting too much pressure? Do they have equivalent counterparts on the opposition team? They're not going to win. And I think it's just a heavy weakness of the rest of the support staff on the team for the Seoul Dynasty, right? So let's have a look at what they got. Like, Creative and Animo is right? Like, it hasn't been sold. I was kind of high on Creative coming into this season, but he's just been okay. Animo, you know how I feel about Animo. I've never been sold on him as a main support. Like, one of the best ones, I think. I didn't think he was going to solve the problems with Seoul. Like, I thought Toby was better than Animo, and I think that's been proven. And then Gesture's inconsistent. They keep trying to force him in with the Winston, but Gesture goes from being like, oh my god, he's still got it on Winston, to turbo feeding from map to map. Marvel's, I think, pretty consistent, but I think he's like, he plays the Reinhardt, he plays the Orisa and those kind of things. And then we have To You on the off tank, who's been another one that's just kind of inconsistent. Like, sometimes I'm like, wow, To You's playing well, and then sometimes I'm like, wow, To You's making a lot of mistakes. He throws a lot of ultimates very questionably, and he does make a lot of mistakes. So that's why I think, like, Profit and Fitz cover up a lot of those mistakes when they really start popping off. But other than that, if that doesn't happen, I don't think the rest of the team is going to really step up. I think you only really see the best of the rest of the team when Profit and Fitz are giving them so much space that they can do anything better, right? They're going to do fine. They'll probably get a couple of match wins. Like, as you see, they'll get a couple of match wins. They'll beat Charge. They can beat Spark. They'll do that kind of stuff. But the one consistent factor throughout the entire season is that Seoul has never been able to beat Shanghai Dragons. In the last 3 showings, they've gotten 1 map off of the Shanghai Dragons. And that really reinforces my point that I make about Seoul, where it's like, if Profit and Fitz can't take over the game, and they can't against the DPS lineup of Lip and Flatter, they just don't really have an answer. So that is where I think Seoul's going to be. They stay in the B tier. There's potential that Seoul could beat some of these Western teams, but Seoul have burnt me too many times before. I don't think they'll make it to Hawaii. I think it'll just be Shanghai, Chengdu, and that's where we'll go from there. So that's where we are in the East. Let's go to the West, right? And let's talk about all these teams in the West, because San Francisco Shock, let's talk about them, right? Because a lot of you, like, where do you guys think the San Francisco Shock should be? Because I think this, like, reinforces my point. It's crazy to me that so many of you say B. Let's look at their record, right? Because I think we can all agree that Shock is not the Shock that we know and love. But they've lost 3 games this season, in the regular season, okay? They're second in overall standing. They went to 3-2 against London. I guess that's probably where a lot of you have your reservations. Like, they almost lost to London, and they lost to the Gladiators, and they lost to Houston. They went 2-2. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a Shock simp, and I just know that they have so much talent that I think it's hard to put them in B tier. But... and you put Seoul B and Shock A. Okay, here is my problem with that, right? You guys are saying that, but I don't think that you guys can, like... you guys are like, oh yeah, they're 9-3 with the, like, the Seoul Dynasty. The Seoul Dynasty is playing in the shittiest region right now. Like, these 3 are, like, free wins for Seoul. And then these 3 are just, like, depending on who's good in that tournament. The Shock have to play against a lot of good teams, and they've beaten a lot of good teams consistently, right? Like, they've beaten Dallas, they've beaten Atlanta, they beat the Glads early on in the season. Like, they've had good wins. But I feel like everyone's just, like, overestimating how bad the Shock is and underestimating as well how much talent they have on the roster. So talent does not equal success. Just look at Seoul. Did you listen to what I just said? Seoul doesn't have talent. Seoul has profit and fits. The whole roster of the San Francisco Shock is very good, right? Their issue is not lack of talent. Their issue is playing well together. Their synergy is awful right now. They have no idea what they're doing. They're moving players around in roles. They're making a ton of mistakes. They have no coordination. They're throwing ults like crazy. And that's not the San Francisco Shock that we know. And I think too many people are just, like, on the train of, like, San Francisco Shock is bad. And I feel like it's hard to justifiably put the Shock down as low as you guys are thinking. And I think everyone is just, like, assuming that the Shock is just going to continuously fail. Think Seoul is better than Shock? Alright. And I'm not going to be able to convince everyone, right? This is my power rankings. This is where we have it. I believe in the Shock more than I believe in the Seoul Dynasty, right? I think that the San Francisco Shock are more likely to succeed. Seoul could be better than the Shock, 100%, in, like, certain metas. But I think I'm more likely to trust that the Shock are going to be good. Shock haven't even won a map in qualifiers? Yeah, but that's because they're in the harder region. And what do you mean? Like, they lost to Atlanta 3-0 when Atlanta was really, really good, and they lost to Dallas 3-0 when Dallas was really, really good. Like, they lost to potentially some of the best teams in those tournaments. 3-0, yeah, that happens. I'm not saying Shock is S tier. I'm saying that they're better than everyone else down here. You guys, like, if I put them here, you guys are saying that Paris and Shock are on the same level. And it's like, maybe in a certain meta at a certain time, but I think I don't do this of just this tournament. I'm saying their overall placing over thing. The Shock are very well rounded if they just play the right players in the right comps in the right situations, but they just haven't done that. And that is what is terrifying about it, is they haven't done those things this year, which is weird. But that doesn't mean that they're a bad team. So, other than Justice, yeah. Will Shock qualify for Hawaii? No. I don't think Shock are going to qualify for Hawaii. I think they're at the bottom of A tier. I'm not saying that they're a thing. I would say I would put the Shock lower than these 4 teams. If we were doing a power ranking, or these 5 teams, I would put Shock at the bottom of this, right? But we're not doing that because we're doing tier lists, because power ranking and saying that this team is better than this team is so objective. Seoul has a better chance of qualifying for Hawaii. Yes, because the East sucks. It's not how a tier list works. There's 8 teams in the East. The East is so inconsistent, and they have like 3 teams that I think are just very mediocre. The Shock are in a very good region. How many, like, people, okay, let's use this as a thought experiment, right? If the Seoul Dynasty were in the West, right? Let's say you put Seoul Dynasty in the West. Do you think the Seoul Dynasty would be 9-3? Yes? No, you guys are crazy. You guys are insane. Okay, I'm moving on. I'm moving on. We're not gonna talk about this. I'm gonna not look at chat for the rest of this. You guys are tilting the crap out of me. All right. Here we go. So let's talk about the Atlanta Reign. And I think the Atlanta Reign is an interesting conundrum for this one. Because the Atlanta Reign are a team that has been really, really good for 2 tournaments, right? They're one of the best that I think we have in the West. Their biggest issue is they don't dive. And we just worked that out when we talked about and we went over... Where did my stats page? They just don't play dive. Like, we're going to look at their entire season again. They just don't do it. This is their entire season of 2021, okay? They have played 13% Winston, 7% Wrecking Ball. They have played, like, no Tracer. There's none of their players have played over 5% Sombra, right? So we're in a very bad tournament for them and a meta for them. So the question is going to be, how is Atlanta going to be? They have shown, like, when we were playing that, like, Neo Goats with the Winston Moira, they were actually pretty good at it. And I actually believe in them, and I think they have the talent to be good. So I'm keeping them in the A tier just because of how good they've been. But this is definitely going to be a real test for Atlanta of how good are they when they're out of their comfort zone, when they can't play the bunker. I really hope that they don't try and play Orisa. Like, they try and, like, slow it down and try and play, like, the Orisa Brig Bap shit. Like Orisa Brig Bap Sim without a Lucio, and they just play like Orisa Diva. I think there's a potential they'll try it, but I would rather just see them dive. And the reason I hope they don't do it is they tried it in the Summer Showdown against Shanghai and Chengdu, and they got bumped. Like, it didn't work. So maybe they can make it work on like Anubis or something like that, but for the most part, I'd rather see them dive. Okay, and here's the thing of where I think we're having a massive disconnect. Patrick says, I mean, Chengdu fucking wrecked Atlanta in the Summer Showdown. I think they will. Not sure you can keep them in the same tier. This is not a tier list of who is going to win in this specific meta that we're assuming that it's going to be in this tournament. This is a power rankings for them as a whole overall in the season at this point in time. Yes, Chengdu is better than Atlanta by a good margin in this tournament. They absolutely destroyed them in the Summer Showdown, and I expect it to be the same. But if we go away from a record, let's say we end up in a Reinhardt meta or a bunker meta in the playoffs, Chengdu falls like a rock because they just don't show that kind of synergy, or we end up in a brawl meta. It's the same thing. I'm not just looking at this one thing of who is going to be good at Wrecking Ball. That is not what we're doing here. We're doing an overall list of who everyone is in the grand scheme of the season. And we're obviously using this meta and this tournament to sort of like predict and sort of be like, this is how they're going to do. But this is not just for the Countdown Cup. Disregard everything else that's happened in this year so far. All right, but that's Atlanta. That's my concerns with Atlanta. They can't dive. Well, maybe they can. We just haven't seen them do it. Time will tell. Houston Outlaws. Houston is another really interesting team. So we got to look at them, right? So they are 9-3, just like the San Francisco Shock, right? They've won most of their matches, but another team that has failed to qualify for the tournaments. Where do you guys think they should be? Should they be an A tier? B tier? All right. So this is another team that has literally only lost to good teams. Oh, I guess Boston. Like, this Boston is an outlier. But they've only really lost to D there. They've lost to Dallas a bunch of times. Someone who ever said they've never won a map in the qualifiers, either is the Houston Outlaws. The Houston Outlaws is literally the exact same as the San Francisco Shock. I consider these teams to be exactly the same in the grand scheme of things. They are essentially one and the same. They have a lot of great talent. They struggle to string it together from time to time. They've had some good wins. So put both in B. No. I'm not going to put them both in B. Why would I put them both in B? Because I think Houston and Shock would still beat almost all of these teams consistently. Like, if these teams, we did a pick'ems and Houston Outlaws and the San Francisco Shock were playing any of these teams, I would always pick the Houston Outlaws and the San Francisco Shock. I just always would. So that is why they stay in the A tier. Outlaws won over... Okay, that's just neither here nor there. Outlaws and San Francisco Shock are one and the same. I think this is another team that is going to be curious for the Houston Outlaws because I want to look at their stats because this is another team that I think has moved away from diving, and it's another team that has spread themselves very thin. They have played more dive, but they have still moved away from it. They obviously have Dreamer, who's in NA now, and I expect to see Dreamer be the one who picks up Winston picks up the Wrecking Ball, and maybe they can make it work. It should be good for them, theoretically, right? You can get Dante on that Tracer. I don't know who's going to be their Sombra player. That is really where, like, the big question mark raises is, like, Happy Sombra hasn't really played it much this season. I don't know if it's good. KSF, I doubt is going to come off the bench. I don't know. I'm not sold on that they're going to be awesome in this meta because I want Dante to play the Tracer and the Sombra, but he can't play both. So we'll see what they decide to do. I think they're still quite good. They still have a great record. I think they've been very dominant and they've won every game they deserve to win, and they won every game that puts them in the A tier. So that's why they're going to be staying in the A tier. No, they won't run Jake. I think they've moved pretty far away from that. Maybe... I guess you're sort of saying if that they're going to play the Brig, if Jake's just going to purely play the Brig, maybe it comes down to if they're going to play any Pharah. I think if they're going to play Pharah, I don't want to see the Jake Mercy again. I think we didn't see any of Jake play support in the Summer Showdown, and I don't know if we'll see more of him. We'll see. I like Juby's Brig. I think he looks fine. I don't think there's a reason. Like, you maybe Jake can play to get that little bit of extra percentage out of it, but I don't see why. But they've also, historically, they've only ever played Jake when they're playing Jangu. And we always made the assumption that maybe it was a communication thing of when Jangu's in, his English isn't as good, so they want Jake to take over the comms. But when Dreamer's in, he communicates a lot, so they can play with Juby. Whether or not there's the validity to that, or if that's actually true, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. What's their schedule like? Because I assume Houston has a hard schedule as well, because every time we look at how hard is their schedule, Houston's always seems to be there. Gladiators, Atlanta, Washington, as we said, as I expected. So it seems like these four teams are just all playing each other. You know what I mean? Washington, Atlanta, Gladiators, and Houston are all just playing each other in the final tournament. So it seems like someone's probably going to have a bad tournament that we're not sure of who it is, who's going to struggle in it. So we'll see. I don't know exactly. A lot of this assumption comes under the basis that we think they're going to play dive. Maybe some of these teams will shy away from it, but I expect them all to be playing it. But we haven't really seen that, so it's hard to make a proper judgment and estimate of where these teams are going to sit when we haven't really seen them play it. So time will tell, as per always. So let's go over to the S tier. Dallas Fuel. We're going to look at them on the S tier. They've been good. I know a lot of you are like, they should go down to A tier because they can't play Wrecking Ball. They can't do this, that kind of that. Dallas stays in S tier because they're just so good. They've been dominant. They've made it to Hawaii every time. They've won one. They made it to the finals in the other. They fell short. They came third in the other one. You can't put them down until they start losing consistently. Obviously, if Wrecking Ball becomes the hard meta and you can't play the Winston Anna like I think you might be able to, then Dallas will struggle. And I think they might struggle even to some of these Western teams who might be able to play it better than them, because there are weaknesses in their play of Sparkle's Tracer is good and serviceable, but it's not as good as like some of the best that we have in the league. Fearless's Wrecking Ball, can he play it? They stay in S tier in my opinion. They're still the champs. Until someone dethrones them, I think it's hard to take them away from that. Valid concerns though in this meta. They struggled very heavily in the Summer Showdown playing these metas. They showed that they couldn't play the Winston. And they just tried to play a lot of Brawl. So, you know, only exciting things will come from the Dallas Fuel, and I don't think you can ever count them out of any tournament. So, we'll see. We'll see. I worry for them. I do. I think this might be the fall of Dallas Fuel. I think this might be one of them where it's like a couple of the other teams really overperform and Dallas falls short. They don't need to win these tournaments. They already have a great record. They've qualified. They're probably going to be #1 in the West already. But they need to start practicing and proving, because if we go into the playoffs and Wrecking Ball becomes meta, Wrecking Ball on the experimental right now just got a ton of buffs. If that goes through, Wrecking Ball is going to get even better. So we'll see. And then let's talk about Shanghai. There's not a lot to say. They're by far the favorites coming into this Countdown Cup. They invented this meta. Nothing has told you that it's not going to be their meta. Everyone's just trying to keep up. I think it's more of a race for who's going to come second than who's going to come first. Their ability to adapt while also playing the Wrecking Ball comps, like they just like move things around from time to time and they just play it well. They're well coached. They have a wealth of talent. They understand the meta. They're fucking just incredible. They have like 3 MVP candidates. You can't fault them for anything. Shanghai Dragons is the best team. SSS plus. I would put them above in another tier if that wasn't just obnoxious. We've already made too many tiers. So Shanghai Dragons are the best. Everyone's got to catch up. But I think Shanghai Dragons is also a team that they would also always be in the S tier. But if we moved away from let's say we ended up in a Reinhardt or a Winston meta, I think Shanghai would struggle. And we saw that in the May Melee when Shanghai had to play Winston against Dallas. Fate struggles. I think Fate's Winston is like a big weakness. It's not just Fate, but they just seem to not play around it anywhere near as well. Like I think the selfish play of a Wrecking Ball and like a Zenyatta with Fate and Izayaki is very good, right? Izayaki plays for himself. He goes for high damage, uses Transcendence to save himself. Fate can play in his own island, doesn't need the support, can play his own game, but also like set his team up for success. It's perfect for them. So we'll see. We'll see. Shanghai win 95%. 95 is a lot, but yeah, very high percentage. Very, very high percentage. So Fate is a good Ryan. Yeah, but their whole team as a whole is not as good at the Reinhardt style, in my opinion. I think they are not as dominant in these other comps as, you know, other people catch up to them a lot. But that's my power rankings. I'm really tilted. I gotta turn off chat when I do these kind of things. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you guys think. YouTube, back me up. Help me out here. Am I on the San Francisco shot copium? Am I not believing in the East falsely? I think this is fair. I think nothing about the East has given me hope that they can be consistently good, but maybe the same thing could be said about the West. But I think the West has been pretty good and they're just a stronger region. So we'll see. The Countdown Cup's going to be a really exciting one, and then we're going into the playoffs where it all matters. So thank you very much for watching. Peace out, and I will see you guys next time.